Welcome, everybody, to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno, episode 30. Today's guest is Edmonton football team wide receiver Shai Ross. Shai, thanks so much for joining today's episode. It's a great pleasure to have you on, and I hope you're doing well in light of all the things that we're going through, and really glad that we're able to connect today.
Absolutely, man. Glad to be on here, and I appreciate you having me.
So, first things first, we got to get out of the way. You're a big guy with, you know, viral catches, and you're really great at utilizing precision to catch the football, and made a bit of a transition from what some would say is an unorthodox place to be playing high level football to playing junior and then eventually working your way up to Edmonton. So let's dial it back a little bit and go towards the first years of you playing football after high school. So you were a guy that played St. Vital Mustangs in
Yup.
major football league here in Manitoba. What was it that led you to play major? And did you have a lot of football experience during your high school years, or what was that phase of your career like?
Yeah, honestly, well, I guess it kind of started in high school. I really didn't decide to play until about grade 12. Actually, is when my first year was, and I've wanted to play my whole life. I've always watched my younger brother Alex Taylor, who's now uh, luckily on the same team as me, actually. So that's pretty cool too. But yeah, so I've always wanted to play, and I finally just decided to pick it up in grade 12. And I wasn't too good at the start. I mean, it was a rough go for the first year or two until I started to kind of get the hang of it, and ended up playing 2 years for Mustangs Major Football. And it was at that point where I really started to kind of get the swing of things and see how the game works, and just utilize my athletic abilities really on the field. And from that point on, I kind of just ran with it. But it wasn't probably until I started playing Okanagan Sun and then getting into the Bisons that I really started to take it a lot more seriously, and take my training seriously. And it was then that I really started to progress.
And with players that become late bloomers, I guess you would say, so to speak, of examples such as Dave Onyemata, who's excelling in the National Football League currently, but him having not ever played football before coming to the Bisons. Did you ever feel like there was a bit of challenge to the predicament that you were in with having started football so late, or did you find that you picked up the ability to play well really fast?
Yeah, man, I'm pretty determined. So I like to think I'm somebody who, if I'm kind of struggling at something, or I can't quite figure it out, or there's other people who are so much better than me, like I really want to take the time and dedicate all my time to working to get better. And that's really what I did. I spent countless hours, just on the field on my own, getting a quarterback when I can, throw me the ball, just doing every little thing I could to kind of catch up to the speed that everyone else was at, because a lot of those guys have been playing since they were 5, 7, 8 years old. And so I definitely had a lot of catching up to do. But yeah, I think I handled it well.
And with the decision to go to Okanagan, for those listening, the Okanagan Sun being a junior football team in the BCFC conference, based out of Kelowna in the interior of BC, have a successful history for being one of the longest tenured franchises in all of junior football for BC. What was the main factor, or I guess the main factors that went into going to Okanagan, because they were on the up of a successful point in their franchise's history. So why Okanagan?
Right. Well, so when I did actually make the decision to go to BC and play for the Okanagan Sun, I had initially attended the Bison Spring Camp, and it was at that point, like I made the team through the spring camp, and but it was just kind of a little bit of a bad timing, because they had quite a few fifth year guys starting at receiver, and I was in a position where I could have went in there and battled for a starting spot, absolutely. But like you mentioned, just coming from junior major football at the Mustangs, there, like the transition I felt was just quite a big jump, from major football straight into the Bisons with not much of a football background. So I just made the decision to go to BC and play junior football. And I mean, at that point, I had probably not been anywhere past Brandon, Manitoba. So going to BC, Okanagan, arguably one of the most beautiful places in the world, really. It was kind of an easy decision, so that's what I ended up doing, and that was definitely a really amazing year for me.
And for those listeners who may not know out there, we played against each other in 2015. I was on the Vancouver on Raiders, and you were in Okanagan. And despite the close battles that our teams had, ultimately Okanagan, you guys were the strongest team, I would argue, in the country. And having fallen short by 10 points in the national championship was definitely an unfortunate ending to a terrific season that you guys were having. Talk a little bit about what happened in that season and what it was that you guys did to become so prepared and to become so successful, considering that BC in recent years has been seen as a very weak conference in comparison to the prairie teams such as the Hilltops. And
Right. Yeah, man. I think just that year, I don't know what it was, but I had never played on it. I hadn't been on many football teams prior to this, but I'd never played on a team that had such a family like chemistry. Literally when we were in that locker room, it was just everyone was your brother, and that was one of the biggest things that I really liked when I went out there initially to go to attend their spring camp. Was it just felt so welcoming, and it felt so natural, and all the coaches, like they everyone just pushed for that family, that brotherhood, and I think we really just connected. And also, I would say a reason that we were pretty successful that year is after that season, we ended up having, I think it was like 27 or 37 players who actually went on to play university football. So we had a pretty stacked team, and yeah, it was an amazing season. We ended up going 12-0, and then fell short in the national championship, which was unfortunate, but ultimately there's something to learn in every situation. So I wouldn't change anything. It was amazing.
what would you say was the best thing about your development at Okanagan that you would give credit in terms of how you were able to transition when you went to the Bisons? Like one specific thing that was an important element to your personal like football development.
Right. I mean, well, just having come from major football and then, wanting to make that transition to university football, I think it was definitely a good little pass by in between just that huge jump from major to the Bisons, and it kind of just helped me, gradually transition. Whereas if I just went straight to the Bisons, I would have felt a little more out of place. So I think going down to BC and seeing what a higher level football, a little bit higher level football looked like, just gave me the opportunity to kind of settle in, see some different defenses, see some better athletes, and kind of get used to that speed of the game. And then transferring over to the Bisons, like I said, we ended up having 30 plus guys go to university after that anyways. So it was a good transition, and I was surrounded by great competition every day, which ultimately led to me being prepared for the Bisons.
So with the Bisons, then you only had, was it 2 years or 3 years to play under them?
I played 3 years for the Bisons.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah,
you got the extra year of eligibility, and with having played three
I
years for
did.
the Bisons, did you find that it was the most beneficial place that you could have been in terms of the continued development of your football skills, or what was it in Manitoba, or what was the moment in Manitoba where you knew that you were starting to really hit your stride?
Yeah, I mean, really from like I like to think I had a pretty decent season in BC, and then really from our first preseason game that I ever had for the Bisons, uh, I had a pretty good game that game as well. We actually played on Vancouver Island against UBC, and I think we beat them by like 50 points. But I ended up scoring a touchdown in that game, and it was just a really welcoming feel to university football, and it really gave me the confidence to know that I could play with these guys, and I'm right there fitting in, and that was special to me too. So that right there gave me the confidence to kind of carry out through the rest of my university career, and yeah, it was pretty special.
As a receiver, there's so many different skill sets that you need in order to be very successful and to compete at a very high level, such as playing in youth sports or also having to play in the CFL. what did you find were some of your strengths when you were with the Bisons that allowed you to really start to stand out and make yourself known as a person that could be potentially drafted to the CFL?
Right. Well, I think I'm a person who's pretty athletically gifted, and so my speed is definitely one of my strongest points, and so that was what I mainly utilized throughout my whole career so far. But especially with the Bisons, I ran a lot of fades, a lot of posts, and stuff like that. Stuff where I'm, really showing my speed, a lot of corners, and I think that was one of the strongest points in my game. So that definitely helped, and I got to be honest, like it wasn't even until probably a year or two ago that I really figured out how to kind of dive a little deeper into what it really means to be a receiver, and just learning that you don't always have to run full speed. There's different shades you can take. There's really so many little nuances to the game that you can utilize that don't just involve running fast. And so once I started kind of becoming a student of the game and just learning and studying those finer details, so religiously, that's when my game really took off to the next level.
And obviously, speed is very important as a receiver, but I think that that is one of the things that it makes a difference between guys that are very tall and guys that maybe aren't as tall, but the ones that can create separation, especially in the CFL with having more field to work with, it really makes a big difference down the road. And I've seen from a lot of your film and from having watched what you do with the Bisons, one of the things that you one of the things I've noticed that you're really, really good at is the over the shoulder catches, really, really being able to locate the ball when it's coming over the top. What has gone into being really good at that skill? Because for receivers, I find when first learning the position, that's one of the hardest things to get used to. And I remember when I first tried out for receiver at St. Paul's, getting used to continuously running, not stopping, looking over, locating the ball, having to beat the defender is one of the hardest sequences of that basic building block skill. So what has
Absolutely.
become so masterful at that skill as a receiver?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, like I said, when I was first, learning how to be a receiver, uh, it was pretty tough. I wasn't that great, like I said, and so all those hours that I really had to put into, literally just catching hundreds upon thousands of footballs, daily, weekly, just getting after it, literally every day, and putting as much time into that as I can. I think, like, I literally used to have this friend in the complex that I was living in, and we would stay out till 2 a.m. under the street lights, literally on the street, just throwing the football, doing different kinds of catches, running fade routes, tracking the ball. And I think it's just repetition, man. There's no secret formula to it. It's just anything that you do consistently, over a long period of time is gonna get good. And that's how I did it.
And repetition, like people talk about, 10,000 hours needed to become a master of a skill. And coming from the book, the nonfiction book by Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, talking about how 10,000 hours going into one thing really makes you a master of it. And you absolutely have had to have mastered many skills quickly from having started so late in comparison to other people. But now that you're at the CFL level, do you find that there is a lot of separation between skill sets and guys who are on, starters versus guys who aren't? Or what do you think is the biggest difference between the guys who get to the league and stick versus the guys who start to make a name for themselves in the league?
Well, it's definitely not a lie. Like will hard work will beat talent when talent doesn't work hard, and I live by that and I stand by that. And so I really truly believe that whatever you put into it, you will get out. So if you're someone who likes to, kind of take it easy, maybe work out once or twice a week during the off season here and there, kind of eat whatever, you're going to get those types of results. If you're someone who's dedicated to their craft, to their meal plan, to their lifts, and you have a solid schedule, you're definitely going to see those results too. So I think one of the biggest things for me was when I did initially get to the CFL, the first 2 weeks to a month were pretty rough. I can honestly say that, I kind of lost a little bit of confidence because when I was in university, I was shining, I was doing well. And then I got to the CFL and the practices were tough and I was getting locked up at times. And, the transition was a little bit overwhelming, but I really think once I settled in and realized that, we're all athletes out here. We're all here for a reason. We've all put in that work, to get to where we are today. There's no reason that I should be, afraid of the competition in front of me. And so once I really realized that, I kind of just took off and ran with it. And like I said, it all comes down to, how much hours you're putting in. So what you do when you go home after football, if you just hop in bed and throw on a movie, you're probably going to continue to see your skill levels stay where it's at, or if anything, drop a little bit. But if you're someone who goes home and picks up a whiteboard and starts drawing out your plays and rehearsing certain things and you watching a little bit of film, you're really going to start to see that. And so that's definitely what I did.
I had a conversation through an interview with a website that I work for with Chris Getzlaff, who used to play for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and he actually played
Awesome.
for Edmonton a little bit towards the end of his career. And one of the things that I didn't actually know about Chris before getting the chance to interview him was that he was a guy that came off the practice roster after his first few years in the CFL. So Chris is a guy that played junior football for the Regina Thunder, played for the University of Regina Rams, and then was drafted by Hamilton and traded to the Riders in 2007 and was a member of their practice roster in the first year he didn't play. The next year he got a few chances to play because of, I think, 4 or 5 guys going to the 6-game injured list. And then 2009 made the breakthrough. And then, as they say, the rest is history. So with a guy like Chris, who was in a similar path to yourself with having had played junior and then university before making the CFL, there was a lot of the similar aspects and characteristics that he talked about in terms of knowing that just because now you're a starter, just because you're in the league, doesn't mean it can't be taken away from you. And something that you seem to have learned about really fast from those first few practices and the first 2 weeks in training camp, especially when you're going up against guys who you've never had the chance to play against, or who are maybe from the US or came from NFL cuts. So what were the biggest things that you learned from that first training camp and that you've taken with you after in the following season through that, or I guess through the first initial season and ever since? What are some of those things that are fundamental to being able to continue to compete in the CFL without being worried about, being overpowered by guys that you've never played against or guys that do different things you've never seen before?
Yeah, man. That's actually an amazing story about Chris. I really didn't know that. And that I kind of have seen quite a bit of trend, towards that, where a lot of guys who are extremely successful at what they do now weren't always that way. And so you really are seeing that trend where it's just guys who really have had to grind and work for it and really get it out the mud, and weren't always just that gifted athlete or in a position where they're just starting right away. And so it really comes down to what we talked about already with putting those hours in and that work in. I can almost guarantee that, Chris, when he was on that practice roster, he was seeing these guys who are starting, and he was really looking up to them, and he really wanted to, get in there, and he wanted to become one of those guys. And probably the only way he figured out how to do that was to just put his head down and do the lonely work, go home, study up, learn that playbook like the back of his hand, draw up the plays on the whiteboard, watch film, just consistently try and model his game after different players that are successful. And I think that's ultimately what it takes. So if you're someone out there who feels like their skill level is less than others, or you want to achieve something that may seem kind of out of reach right now, it really comes down to just that work and what you do. Like you're not just going to get there from sitting around, nothing in this world is just going to be given to you. You really got to go out there and get it. And so that's one of the main things that I learned. I was fortunate enough to to make the active roster in my first year in the CFL. And unfortunately, I suffered a concussion in week 6 and whatever, and didn't end up playing for the rest of the season. But um, the whole training camp, it was all a grind, and I really had to just put my head down and just lock in.
And that element you talked about of Chris probably looking up to older receivers with how successful Saskatchewan was during the late 2000s, early 2010s, you could see in their Grey Cup victory in 2007, and then they're almost in 2009, and then back in 2010. They had a lot of great receivers that they were able to go to, and a lot of guys that you could look up to if you were a younger guy, maybe was on the bench, the practice roster. So when you first arrived in Edmonton, were there then a few receivers or maybe a guy that you really looked up to, or a veteran that you formed a bond with that helped with showing you the ropes to the league, or how have you developed relationships with guys who were veterans on the team when you first got there?
Absolutely, man. When I got there, like I said, I was fortunate enough to make the active roster as a receiver. And when you're in the CFL, they don't dress many receivers; they dress 6, maybe 7. So some of the guys that I was behind is Greg Ellingson, who is one of the best receivers I've ever watched play. There's Ricky Collins, who is amazing. Kenny Stafford was there as well. He's an absolute baller. And then there's Canadians like Tavon Smith, who was in the NFL for a couple of years and doing his thing. And then there's Nataya Jay, who is also an amazing Canadian receiver. So I really had these 5 receivers to really look up to, and Kevin Elliott as well, who had a stint in the NFL and is now in the CFL as well. Just all these receivers that all have their own different unique playing styles, and they're all their own individuals. And I was really fortunate enough to kind of be behind them and learn from all of them in their own ways. And so that's exactly what I did. I didn't skip a beat on missing that opportunity whatsoever.
You mentioned the name Greg Ellingson. When that name comes to mind, the first thing I think of is amazing diving catches. I think of the amazing touchdown catch he made against Hamilton in the, I think, 2016 or 17 Eastern Final. And he was
Absolutely.
absolutely outstanding receiver, super, super talented. What
Yeah.
what was it like being able to watch him from up close? And what were some of the things you noticed that he did in his regiment that helped him to stand out?
Right. Well, one of the most important things I think I learned as a receiver from playing behind these guys is, like I said before, everyone thinks that being a receiver, you always got to run your fastest like 100% of the time. And it's really not all about that. Greg is probably one of the best people at this specific skill, is changing his tempo. So he'll burst off the line, slow it down, and then burst into his out route, or he'll find different ways to play with the tempo. And he's really an artist when you think about it. He's crafting up his own routes and playing with the change of speed, direction, everything. And I think that's one of the most important things I learned from him.
And now, in talking about watching these guys' crafts, you have now had the opportunity to start training guys and young players here in Winnipeg to learn skills to play as a receiver, or to be, if you're a running back, or deep, that person that finds the next year. So you've started training like a pro. So talk a bit about that venture and what some of the things are that some of the outcomes that you have with training guys here in Winnipeg now, and really starting to learn more, maybe by teaching others.
Absolutely. So, I mean, with the world we're living in right now, with the whole COVID thing going on and everything, we obviously, unfortunately, the season was canceled, and so I found myself having quite a bit of extra time on my hands. And so I was just, kind of thinking of different ways to kind of give back to the community. And I love spending time on the field. And so when I'm not training, if I could be out there training someone else, I'm still learning while I'm training them, and I'm also helping them get better too. So yeah, so I started training like a pro, And I really just started it to, work with a few receivers on my downtime and help them develop their craft. And, a month or two in, it really took off to where I had, up to 20 or more receivers out on the field at a time. So that was really special. And so, yeah, really the whole point behind it is I'm trying to just be someone for these kids that I so desperately needed when I was 10, 12, 14, 16, kind of that guidance, that person who can tell them, who can work with them and teach them the different nuances of the game. And I think that's just so important. When you're young and you're in high school, you don't really know to kind of focus on the detail. You kind of just play the sport, you run around, you have fun. It's amazing, but the determination that I saw from these kids in actually wanting to learn the details about why they do certain things or how they do certain things, they were really into it and they bought in, and we started to see amazing progress within a very short amount of time. And then the opportunity for to play the flag football with pro prep came up, and a lot of my guys ended up joining that, and it was amazing to watch. As a coach, I got to watch them put their skills to the test, and they were really seeing the benefits of it. I would get messages every day saying, "Coach, I applied that snap down technique that you taught me the other day, and I burnt one of the DVs, or I made this crazy over the shoulder catch that you kind of helped me work on." And it's just really special, man. So whatever I can do to kind of give back and empower the youth is really what it's all about.
And that's such a great point that you make. Is from the last time we were talking with DJ, we were talking about giving back, and especially through the work that him and Andrew have been doing through Pro Prep. And that when you see the work that goes into organizing a football league, seeing kids get better or get that opportunity to get to the next level because of the work that you're putting in, it's super rewarding and, to be quite honest, very invaluable, right? Being a CFL player is temporary, but a lasting impact on the lives of the next generation is forever. And I think that that's
Absolutely, man.
um, about being a professional athlete, is being afforded the gift and the ability to have that platform to then give it back and then to
Exactly.
the next generation. So with the work that you've been doing with Train Like a Pro, one of the questions I wanted to ask was, what are some of the drills that you found that receivers struggle with the most, and what area do you find making the most improvement in, based on those things that maybe are lacking, like in general terms? Like, it could be just based on the sample size that we work with.
Yeah, right. So I think one of the biggest things that I was teaching these receivers is, they can all run fast. I don't really have to teach them how to run. Everyone knows how to run, right? But one of the biggest things you have to know as a receiver is you can run fast, but can you stop? And so as a receiver, when you want to run your routes, there's specific, ways that you want to decelerate, and you want to do it as efficiently as possible in the least amount of steps. And you want to do it without giving any tell signs that to the DB that you're going to be breaking down or you're going to be stopping or changing direction. And so one of the biggest things that I was teaching them is we call it a snap down technique. And it's just a way for us to be running full speed, give no signs to the DB that we're going to be braking or changing direction, and really get in and out of our break as efficiently as possible. And so, and it's also one of the funnest skills to work as a receiver. So we would work a lot on that, and like I said before, we would put a lot of time into tracking those deep balls, catching those over the shoulders, and working on our hands as receivers. That's our main job, is to catch the ball. If we're not catching the ball, then we're not doing our job at the end of the day. So really just getting in and out of their breaks and catching the ball, and then whatever happens after that is on them, and that whatever they do with the ball is going to be special.
Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned, being the guy that these kids can then look up to. Were there receivers once you started playing football that were maybe in the NFL or CFL that you looked up to or saw as role models in terms of their style of play or how they conducted themselves, or who would some of those guys
Right.
yourself?
Well, when I was really young, I actually used to watch. I used to watch Brandon Banks, who's now in the CFL. But when I would watch him, he was playing for the Washington Redskins. He was a kick returner, and he's that smaller guy. Like all my life, I've been a skinnier guy. I've been on the smaller size. I mean, I'm 6 feet tall, but I'm not too heavy. And so seeing him play and seeing him play with the big dogs that are in the NFL was pretty special. And so I really looked up to him. And even seeing him now in the CFL, like he's lightning fast. I take pride in my speed as well. So I was kind of modeling my game a little bit after him. I did a little bit of returning with the Bisons, and as well as when I went to Edmonton, I was returning for them as well a bit too. So yeah, I definitely looked up to him. And even currently, some receivers that I watch in the NFL, love to watch Odell Beckham. I think he's a really special player. Love watching Jarvis Landry. The two of them on the same team is really special to watch. And even coming back to what I said about like just really repping your craft, like those are two people who came up. They played LSU together, and I've heard stories about them sneaking into the stadium and shooting the jug machine and catching one-handed balls, until 2 or 3 or 4 a.m. So that's really special to hear. And so I kind of try and mimic my game after them a little bit. Um, and yeah.
Speaking of jug machines, we're talking about working one-handed catches. What is it like working with the quarterbacks in the CFL? Because you were on the same team as Mike Riley, at least for 1 year, correct?
No, no, I wasn't on the same team as Mike Riley. Trevor Harris.
Oh, Trevor. Okay, so you were after Mike Riley had left CBC.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so even still, I think Trevor Harris is probably the most underrated quarterback in the entire CFL. To be honest, I think he has the best skill because he hasn't won a great cup or whatever. Like people, oh, well, he's actually not that good or blah blah blah. But no, Trevor Harris, if you ever listen to this, you're amazing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
He's
But
definitely special. He definitely has, something about him that he just works so hard, and it really rubs off on the players. And that's aside from receivers, that's probably one of the people who I looked up to the most. Being in Edmonton was him, and we bonded quite well too. So uh, yeah, he's definitely a special player.
what's it like playing with him? Because he himself is not necessarily a giant or anything, but he can throw really really quick. I think he has one of the quickest releases, and he throws a crisp ball. Like he is super super accurate. What's it like when you're playing with guys in Okanagan and the Major and the Bisons, and all of a sudden you're playing with Trevor Harris, who throws the ball on a dime quite literally almost all the time.
Right. I mean, yeah, literally, like I said, like he's just somebody who the amount of detail that he pays attention to is really insane. Like he could make a throw, it could be the most beautiful throw you've ever seen, and he'll be like he'll be critiquing it in his own head. So he really focuses on the detail. He's a really extremely hard worker, and like I said, he really puts his hours in. He's the first one, at the stadium, and almost the last one to leave every time. He really puts the hours in, and it definitely shows.
And from all the teams that he's been on and the entire journey that his CFL career has taken him on is truly special to see him now get the opportunity to still be a starter again in Edmonton. And you know, despite maybe some of the other names that always come up, as in the Mike Rileys and the Boleva Mitchells, I think Trevor Harris is right up there. And to get to work with someone like that who's extremely hardworking and has that work ethic that rubs off on his teammates, that must be something that's super super amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of like that story about Getzlaff. I mean, Trevor Harris hasn't always been in a position where he was starting. He had to definitely climb up the ranks, and he sat behind some pretty amazing quarterbacks, to say the least. I think he was sat behind Ricky Ray as well. So he's definitely had to climb his way up, and his hard work has definitely paid off.
So now with what you've been doing in terms of your time during this season, doing train like a pro, but what has been maybe the most enlightening thing that you've started to learn or figure out from all of us really having to slow down and not be able to be as go as we were before? And what about and what is it about what you've learned going to be useful going into the next season that you have with them?
You know, it's interesting the word you used. You said that we all have had to kind of slow it down. And I think that is one of the most special things about the time that we're living in right now is we're forced to be in a position where we literally have to slow it down. And we're now, you know, some of us are locked up in our house. You know, we have restrictions in our neighborhood. We can't go shopping. We can't do some of the things we want. So we literally have to slow it down and be in our heads. And so one of the biggest things I've learned throughout all this is, you know, I've always been that person who is focused so much on the physical training and you know, grinding in the gym, putting those hours on the field, that I kind of neglected the mental training as well. And that is arguably more important than the physical. So throughout this period of time, it's been an amazing learning experience because I've been now forced to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the mental side of the game, not only the game, but even just getting to know myself a little bit better, you know. So doing the little things like watching new podcasts, you know, learning new things, learning about how the brain works, learning about how the brain thinks, and just different things like that. I really think it's really special, you know, with the lives that we live, you know, aside from COVID, they can be pretty hectic at times. And I think one of the most overlooked things is self-care. And so people get so caught up in work and family and issues that going on in different relationships and stuff that we forget to take care of, you know, the heart and the mind. And so I think that's arguably one of the most important things in life is to really make sure that you're taking care of yourself at the end of the day as well.
I love that you mentioned that because when you talk about the mental aspect, it was something that I dabbled a little bit on with one of my first guests, who was a receiver with Whitman Tumuziak, who played for the Dinos and the Raiders and the Lions, and he talked about him really enjoying sports psychology and how the mental edge in professional sports honestly becomes equally as important, if not at sometimes more, as the physical side, because when you get to the CFL, sure, maybe you're, a different body frame than another player, but at the end of the day, you're both very talented and you're both good enough to be there. So what is going to be the difference, right? And it makes me think of, I want to post something up here. So it makes me think of a poem that I saw the other day on LinkedIn. It was posted by Hal Johnson. Hal Johnson being very famous for his 1980s workout videos with his wife on Body Break, the show that they had here in Canada. And
Joanne McLeod.
Pardon?
I said his wife, Joanne McLeod.
Oh yeah, and yes, of course, yeah, Joanne.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah, so he posted this, and I saw his clip in the Rod Peterson show as well, and for all of us who grew up, here in Canada, Hal Johnson and Joanne, like they're amazing people at promoting physical activity and really being good at motivating, and so
Definitely.
So this poem here is called "The Man Who Thinks He Can." It's a very old poem, but Hal shared it in reference to the mental aspect. It goes like this: If you think you are beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win but think you can't, it's almost a cinch that you won't. If you think that you'll lose, you're lost. For out in the world we find success begins with a fellow's will. It's all in a state of mind. If you think you're outclassed, you are. You've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win a prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later, the man who wins is the one who thinks he can. And the reason why I love that poem and that he shared it, he says, like, I encourage you, just think about this every day, or just read it out once, just every day. And
Yeah.
and it goes back to that something we were talking about earlier about, you know, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And that the mental aspect of professional sports is so daunting. And now with the increased attention, which is good, to mental health, we're starting to see now that it plays such an important role in your success, and that maybe you don't have to be the biggest and tallest or strongest or fastest, but you look at the guys like the Trevor Harrises, the Chris Getzlaffs, even the Weston Dresslers, who were or Brandon Banks, 5'7", and considered the best of their position when they played. Insane. So what are some of the things you have tried to improve upon in terms of your mental game to help you going forward as a professional athlete, but not just as that, but as a person in general? Because I think it's something that we all should always give attention to, and not just only during certain times of the year.
Definitely, man. That poem is amazing, by the way. Please send that to me.
Absolutely.
But yeah, some of the things that I've just been doing is even just the most basic things, like just watching more film, watching my film, see what the reasons are that maybe I'm losing certain reps or winning certain reps. A ton of visualization. I think I had a pretty successful combine leading up to me going to Edmonton. But one of the biggest things that I did leading up to that combine was I literally would visualize every single drill or thing that they were going to put us through hundreds of times. Like the night before, I would take a dark shower and I would visualize myself running a 40 probably 100 times. And they say that mental reps actually count as if you were actually out on the field running it. So I could go to the field and I couldn't run 140s. I would be gassed, right? But I can definitely do it in my head. And the more you're able to really visualize it in full detail, specifically what you want to see, what your outcome you want to have, or even just the mechanics you want to have while you're doing it, it's going to be highly beneficial. So visualization has been a huge thing for me. Another big thing that I'm really into right now is yoga. I'm actually a certified yoga instructor, but it's yoga, and through yoga comes a lot of meditation, a lot of breathing techniques, and all of those play a huge role into the visualization and calming the mind. Being in a state where you're fully functionable. You don't have to overexert yourself. You don't have to try so hard. You need to be mentally focused so that you're able to lock in. And so, I mean, I'm not a player who wants to get super hyped up before a game and jump around and bang my head on the wall. I don't really need that. I want to be in a more calm space where I feel like I'm locked in and I'm rehearsing my plays in my head and I'm seeing those big catches, so that when I'm in that position on the field, it's like I've seen it before and it just happens.
And that's such an important part. I really like that you brought up visualization and being calm. When I played football, I think one of the best seasons that I had in terms of individual performance was during a season in which I was struggling mentally during training camp, and then unbeknown to myself, the person that actually helped me with being successful mentally was our team trainer. And he was a volunteer, and his name was Daryl. And he said to me, he's like, just believe that you're going to make it. Watch the ball go through the uprights in your head. And he just
Yeah,
said that to me, and I was like, oh, like that's like why didn't I ever think that before? And every
exactly.
week in practice, I always think about that. And though there were times I missed, I only recall missing back-to-back field goals in a practice once during the entire year. And I mean, even though we didn't have many field goals to attempt during that season, I never missed a field goal in extra point. And it was the only season in which I'd ever done that. And so
Awesome.
when I look back on my career and the years I played, that showed me that when I was focused on that individual moment and when I was visualizing success before it happened, that it yielded the best results in spite of the level that you're playing, because I found
Mm-hmm.
too caught up with thinking about the next level or other people's performance. When you just focus on what is in your control, visualize it, visualize you succeeding, and do it tons of times. By the time you get
Absolutely.
there, you'll feel like you've already done it.
Exactly.
And this is a story that I'll share with the listeners now and with yourself. Is one of the biggest people that I wanted to target as a guest when I first started my podcast was Milt Stegall. You know,
What's who? Sorry.
Milt Stegall.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
like
yeah.
to me, I would regard him as, arguably the best receiver in CFL history. Other guys are up there, Jure, Simon Van Cahoon. It's pretty give and take depending on those three. G. Roy
Yeah.
won great cups and was also equally as talented, and sometimes, if not, you could argue more. And Ben Cahoon is a guy that works within, is like a Russell Wilson, like works within a frame that maybe isn't prototypical, but almost never drop the ball and maximize the efficiency level of his skill within his frame. And so one of the things that I did before I did the interview with him was envision myself talking to him. And I was like, ending in my mind, like imagine talking to him. Like, what would you say? What do you think he would say? What if you asked him this? And I just envisioned it and I visualized it over and over and over. And then eventually, when we got to the interview, it was almost as if I'd been there, and it was almost as if it had happened before. And even as some of my friends were like, "Oh, weren't you like fangirling, or wasn't it so crazy?" I was like, it was crazy to think about afterwards, but not crazy in the moment because I felt like I'd been there, and because obviously Milt is such a charismatic guy that it was easy because when you're prepared mentally and prepared, I guess in this case, like mainly mentally, when you know your stuff and you
Yeah.
visualize this, then when you get there and you put the pieces together, it's almost seamless.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, man, it's one of the most underestimated things in life, man. The mind is one of the most powerful things out there. And so if you can visualize it in your mind, the body's going to follow along. So if you can visualize yourself making that catch, it's going to happen. Definitely.
100%, and that is definitely so key as a receiver. Not only the fact that you have to locate the ball in every play, number one, influence you, but number two, seeing that happen before you even get on the field, because then it'll all be familiar, and when you get to that level of familiarity,
Totally.
catching the ball, then
You
when
will
you're
have
like,
already done it before, so the nerves won't be there.
yeah, and it's I remember Dylan Schrott actually had the opportunity when he was on my podcast earlier this year talking about visualization and how he used that when,
That's
he's
funny because he's one of the people. He's one of the people who I learned it from, and every game that we've ever played, we'd be 10 minutes before the game, and everyone's looking for Dylan. It's like, where's Dylan? He's not in the locker room getting hyped up. He's in the meeting room, hiding behind some desks in the dark, like laying on his back with his eyes closed, just visualizing the game. And there's a reason why he had the career he did with the Bosons. He's player. He's extremely and extremely talented when it comes to visualizing things and seeing it happen and making it happen. So that was
yeah,
pretty awesome.
yeah, he told a story of how when he was playing for the Colts that he had dropped like an important pass against the Thunder, and was really rattled by it, but then he used visualization to help him going forward. And he was actually a person that also inspired me into reading certain books, into like looking more into the mental aspect of sports. And then when he
Awesome.
when he finally used tons of visualization, he was able to make that touchdown catch that made the difference when they, I think it was beat the Huskies or Regina later on in the season. So again, it works so well.
Nice.
It's an underrated
Absolutely.
part of success in sports, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's
So,
awesome.
Shai, we're almost towards the end of our time here, so I wanted to ask you one last question before we wrap up today's episode. So, if there was one quarterback that you could choose in a fantasy like setting that you would want to play with on the same team, who would it be and why? And it can be from any era, NFL, CFL, doesn't matter. Who do you think would be the best quarterback to be throwing you the ball?
Oh man. Holy smokes. Damn, that's a tough question, man. There's so many special quarterbacks for so many different reasons. I'm just gonna keep it real sappy. I gotta stay loyal and just go with Trevor Harris, man. That's my guy. That's somebody who I can rely on. That's somebody I know who has done the lonely work and put in the hours to know that if he's making that throw, that he probably knows what he's doing. And so I've seen his background work, in person, And so that's definitely somebody I know I can trust who's going to put me in a good position to make a play. So I'm gonna go with Trevor Harris.
Well, I don't think there's any wrong answers there. You are right. There are so many great quarterbacks, and Trevor is a guy. If he was rifling me the ball, I'd make sure I'd never let him down with every ounce that I possibly could. Even though I don't know if my hands are, not even as fast as yours, but he's a hardworking teammate, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Well, Shai, thanks so much for being on today's episode. It was super great. I'm really glad we were able to finally connect, have this talk, have this recording because it's such an important part of getting stories out there and also developing the mental side and strength of being a professional athlete and not just and outside of the scope of that because there may not be many pro athletes that listen to this but just in general visualization can lead to success a lot more than people think. So thanks so much for being on today's episode, man. It was awesome.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me. I think it's great what you're doing, and keep up the good work, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, everyone, thank you again for listening to today's episode with Edmonton wide receiver Shai Ross.